Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, brought to you by University of Illinois Extension and Illinois Rural Development Council. I'm Richard Crawford, a community and economic development educator for Extension and your moderator today. As with most webinars that we have, there are a few housekeeping items that we need to go over to allow for an enjoyable experience for everyone who's participating. If you have questions or comments, please put them on, please use the chat screen, which is typically over to your right-hand side of the screen as you look at it, by selecting the chat button located in the bottom row of your Zoom screen. You can add questions at any time during the presentation. I will then ask those questions during the Q&A portion of the webinar. And then we are recording today's webinar for viewing on our Extension CED YouTube channel. Yes, we do have one. And you will receive an email in the future with the link to the recording, slides, and other applicable materials that are relevant for today. Now, as one of our co-sponsors for this webinar, I would like to introduce Ann Silvas, who is the program director for University of Illinois Community and Economic Development and a board member for the Illinois Rural Development Council. Ann?
Thanks, Richard. And as you said, I'm going to be wearing two hats today. One hat is my role with University of Illinois Extension, and I thank Jim for coming and sharing with us. And the other hat that I'm wearing is as a board member for Rural Partners, the Illinois Rural Development Council. So Extension and Rural Partners develop these programs together and co-sponsor them. So from my Rural Partners perspective, I want to thank Extension for hosting the webinar and a whole series of webinars, and we really appreciate that collaboration. And I'm going to put my Extension hat back on and say that in a minute, I'm going to post a link in the chat that will link to a survey that Extension is hosting that will inform our strategic planning process. And just click on it, and then later when you have time, 5 or 7 minutes, just take a look at that survey. We would really appreciate it if you provided your comments that will inform the strategic planning process for Extension. So thanks everyone for joining us, and Richard, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, Ann. It's always good to be a partner with organizations that have a common goal and common thought. Two things I wanted to point out is I appreciate you posting in the chat your name, where you're from. That's going to give us a good idea of people who are here today. So please continue to do that. And also, we've done something different today. We have unmuted you. We have potentially set the world free for you to talk. we trust you will respect this particular venue and put yourself on mute. We'll recognize you if you have questions, if you want to raise your hand, but we do ask again that you post your questions in the chat, and we'll ask those at the end. So a little different here today for us. Now, I would like to introduce our presenter, Jim Miller. He serves as the state coordinator for the Illinois Main Street program. I'm going to let Jim tell you about himself because he can do it better than me, quite honestly. But I am going to share one item that we have in common. We are both recent transplants to Illinois, but we have a common connection of where we both worked with our respective states' Main Street programs. Jim, the screen is yours. Tell us about the revamped Illinois Main Street program.
Well, thank you so much, Ann and Richard and all of you that are here. It's great. I'm always happy to talk about Main Street. Yes, just before I begin, again, thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. Just a tiny bit of my background. I served for about 14 years. I served as the Main Street director in Valley Junction, which is the historic downtown for West Des Moines, Iowa. Served there until late 2019, and then relocated to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, as a museum and arts director. And then Main Street called me back, or I was called back to Main Street, maybe a little of both. in last summer, explored this option in Illinois and came on board just after Labor Day last year. So it's quickly approaching a whirlwind year, but we're going to talk about the program and where we are and where we want to be. But before I dig into it, I'm gonna put a few people on the spot if I can. I know there was a long list of folks that had registered, and I'm not sure who is here, but if you are a director of a designated Illinois Main Street community, if you would not mind just saying who you are and tell us a little bit about your community. Again, we have 24 communities currently, plus our Chicago program. So again, if you are a director of a designated program, if you wouldn't mind saying who you are and just a little bit about your community.
Yeah, I'll go first. I'm Jana Grow-Herring. I'm the executive director of Sterling Main Street in Sterling, Illinois, up here in the northwest corner of the state. We became an accredited Main Street program in 2009, and I've been the director here since 2013.
Excellent. Thank you, Jana. Others that are on the call or other communities that are designated Illinois Main Street communities? Okay, Jana wins the prize. She and I are both headed to Jacksonville later today for a workshop tomorrow, but Jana wins the prize. So thank you very much. Again, as I said, I've been with Illinois Main Street for soon to be a year, and the program has certainly had its ups and downs, stops and starts, but I do feel like we're at a different point of where the program has been and where we're headed. But again, I'm not going to assume anyone on this call knows anything about Main Street or knows everything about Main Street. But we are, if you don't know, I'm going to try and go through this within reason as quickly as I can. I have a lot to cover, but I don't want to have good time for questions. But Main Street is, as we call it, is a movement. The Main Street Program National has been in existence officially since 1980. So 43 years ago, over 43 years ago, the program began. We currently have about 1,600 programs throughout the country. I'll show you a map in a little bit. We are almost nationwide. We've got a few gaps here and there, but again, we do have communities all over the country. We also have just started a program in Puerto Rico. So that is an exciting opportunity for us and growth to be outside of the continental United States. But again, about 1,400 programs. We have 46 what we call coordinating programs. In most cases, but not all, in most cases, a coordinating program is a statewide program. Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota. We do also have about 8 citywide programs, Boston, Baltimore, Chicago, a few others. We also have 1 countywide program, which is Oakland County, which is in and around Detroit, Michigan. They have about 20 some programs. Most of our city programs are neighborhood districts. Chicago has 13, I believe. Boston has about 20. Boston is one of our oldest programs. And again, it's citywide. Most cases, again, we're a statewide program, but not all. But really, this movement looks different in every location. As I said, if we have 46 coordinating, we have 46 coordinating programs. And we have 46 models of what works. Main Street is not a prescriptive program. And I think that is both for a coordinating program and local programs. Again, we have about 1,600 local programs. They all operate for how it makes sense for them. Some are a standalone nonprofit. Some are embedded in the city they're located in. Some are a umbrella, I call them. So it could be Main Street, Chamber, Tourism, Economic Development. There are many different conglomerations of how it works. But again, we focus on historic downtown districts and neighborhood districts. That has been a shift over the past several years, that for many decades, truly, Main Street was historic downtowns. That has changed as we have more and more neighborhoods. They may be smaller, they may not be smaller, but again, we're not only historic downtowns. That's where we began. But again, that really has shifted, I would say, over about the past 10 years. And again, we have always had a program that is about partnership and collaboration. As I said earlier, we are not prescriptive. We don't tell a community, this is how you must do Main Street. What it looks like in Sterling is different than Jacksonville, is different than Moline, wherever it may be, many different examples. And it's what makes sense for those programs. We also really believe that we want our Main Street districts to be open to everyone. Every neighborhood, every district looks different. Every neighborhood and district has different challenges. Every neighborhood and district has great successes that are different. So again, we're looking at downtowns and neighborhood commercial districts all across the country, whether they are smaller rural communities, whether they are neighborhood districts, whether they're large communities. We have communities from nationwide. We have communities from 500 or 600 people up to Des Moines, Springfield's much larger communities. So it is not a rural program only. It is not an urban program. It's both of those. And we also feel, again, Main Street, in my opinion, has really changed over the past 5 to 10 years. That again, as we really shifted and really embraced that change from we're only working in historic downtowns, I think it changed how we do things. That again, we've always been about community, but we really are about community. Whatever your community looks like and whatever your community needs are, we want to work with you. We don't work for you. I think that's an important designation in our world, that we don't come in and say, here's everything you're going to do. Here's how we're going to fix what we think needs fixed. Certainly, if you live in Springfield, you know more about Springfield than we do. If you live in Jacksonville, you know more about Jacksonville and say, here's what's going well. Here's not what's not going well, and be able to address those. But again, we provide resources, we provide partnerships. We also never forget the part about historic preservation. The phrase that I've used often is we do economic and community development through the lens of historic preservation. That's an important designation and one that we don't forget as an organization. Certainly, we don't want to see a district wiped out and 12 buildings knocked down. We want to preserve those districts. The use of those districts and the look of those districts certainly changes, but we're really focused on that to say community development, economic development, business growth, housing growth in that historic fabric, if you will. Sorry. Not sure what happened there. You get to see all my slides all at once. Sorry about that, folks. There we are. I'm sorry. We also work with, we released our strategic plan about not quite 2 years ago. We are in the midst of hiring a new CEO that will have an announcement very soon about that. But again, what does the organization look like moving forward? We are headquartered in Chicago. We have about between 35 and 40 employees that are all across the country. About a third are in and around Chicago, but we have folks in Texas, Florida, Oregon, you name it, all over, working on different departments. Currently, Illinois Main Street is operated through National Main Street America, as is California, as is Puerto Rico. I'm currently a one-person staff. So again, I have access to all of those folks, but again, officially it's a one-person department. But these 6 objectives are really where we are headed currently in the next 5 to 10 years. As I said earlier, Main Street really has changed over the past 5 to 10 years. What do we work on? Where are our successes? Where are the things we still need to work on? So again, we're looking at what communities are doing. And these really are guiding the organization and guiding the coordinating programs. As I said earlier, we aren't prescriptive. So we don't tell a coordinating program or a local program, here's how you work. Here are the things we want you to focus on. Here are our best practices. But we don't necessarily say, here's what you must do. And the Main Street approach, as we call it, is just that. It's an approach. I won't say that Main Street is the end all and it's perfect for every community. It's not. There are communities that it's not the right fit for a number of reasons. Sometimes it just is the wrong time, the wrong people, the wrong approach. Sometimes it's too much work. I will say that because we do expect communities that are designated Main Street communities to produce. Again, what that production looks like is different in every community, but to say we have best practices, we have expectations, we offer training, we offer resources, and we have used this 4-point approach since our beginning. That 4-point approach has morphed through the years, but it's always been these 4 things: economic vitality, design, organization, and promotion. So again, we're looking at that physical environment, the design element, the physical environment, the promotion, the social environment, I call it, the economic vitality, the business, the commerce look of it, and then organization, last but not least, to say, do we have volunteers? Do we have financing? Do we have communications going on? So all 4 of those work together. I'll show you a slide later. We use the circle a lot, that it's not 1, 2, 3, or 4. It's all 4 of those, we hope. And again, just a basic structure. Again, we're talking local communities. So we have a local community organization, however they function, whether, again, if it's a standalone, whether it's a combo, whether it's a whatever it may be. And then we, as what we call ourselves the coordinating partner, we try and provide partnership and resources to those communities. So again, through collaboration to say, what does this look like? Again, looks different in every community, but what does it look like? So again, we as Illinois Main Street as the coordinating program are there. And then last but not least, Main Street America is that national partner. And it's not a reporting, it's not a hierarchy. We are 3 partners in this. All communities that are designated, we actually have a 3-way signed agreement between the local community, between the state organization, and between the national organization of here are expectations. Again, communities don't report to the state, we don't report to national, it's all of us together. And I think that's really important as we work with community. It's not, oh, you're reporting to me. That's not how I view it at all. Just some stats for those of you that are not familiar with Main Street. Again, we're 43 years into this, and perhaps to the chagrin of our community directors, we insist on statistics. We track business growth, we track job growth, we track volunteer hours, we track building spending. And we've been tracking this for 43 years, 42 on these stats. But again, the numbers are hard to ignore. We certainly don't take credit for everything that happens in a district. I don't believe that at all. I do think having a Main Street program that is succeeding and working makes a huge difference in a community. It's been said, when you go into a community, you can maybe tell that they're a Main Street community. I think that's a great compliment. Things are happening. It doesn't mean Main Street makes it a perfect community at all, but things are happening. Again, these stats are through 2022. We released these stats earlier this year at our conference, but those numbers are pretty amazing. I don't need to say that certainly COVID has done a number on many communities. What's interesting is we've seen significant business growth over these past 3 years. That, of course, when the world shut down, we all tried to figure out what's next. And as a result, there were a lot of businesses that opened. Certainly, there were a lot of businesses that closed, but that net gain is significant. This is just a map, a very general map. The yellow dots represent our coordinating programs. Again, in most cases, those are state programs. And then the green and the blue are our communities throughout the country. Some are an affiliate program, some are an accredited program. Without getting too far in the weeds, accreditation is for our highest performing and our best communities. There are very defined expectations for a community to be accredited. It's not something that happens every year. About 50% of our communities are accredited. And again, that list changes. But again, yellow is our coordinating programs, blue and green, are our community programs. Just in case you were curious, we are organized in 5 different regions. You can see where we land. Also, the gray sections the gray states, I should say, do not have a current coordinating program. Several of those are in the works that we hope to be able to announce some of those later this year. And we have programs, again, coordinating programs that have been involved for 43 years, and some have been involved for 5 or 10 years. What's interesting about Illinois is in 1978, we for years were a division of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. We are now an affiliate of them, but for years we were a department of the National Trust. And most of you would know the National Trust was all about national parks and the National Register of Historic Places and historically significant places. And again, in 1977, the discussion began, what about historic downtowns? What about historic buildings? They might not be this landmark building, but what about 3 blocks of historic buildings and they're going to come tumbling down? What do we do? So again, there was a pilot program from 1978 to 1977 to 79. And as it happens, Galesburg, Illinois was one of the pilot communities to say, is there anything to this program? Is this worth having? One in Illinois and one in Indiana. To state the obvious, it worked pretty well. In 1980, the program was the National Main Street Center was officially created. Again, we were based at the National Trust in DC for many years. And about 10 years ago, when we decided it's time to be an affiliate, we relocated our national office to Chicago and have been building back since then. Some of the resources that we offer, I'm going to kind of go over our national program and then dig a little deeper into Illinois. We offer what we call our transformation workshops. This is a deep dive into a community that we come in and work with them, again, not for them, but we come in and work with them to say, what's happening in this community? What would you like to see happen in this? We do extensive survey work, focus groups on site, focus groups online to say, what's been happening in this community? As an example, maybe for years, people have talked about, we don't have upper story housing in this district. We have all these buildings that are 2 and 3 stories. We don't know who's upstairs or if they're upstairs. What can we do with those buildings? So it might be, we suggest you focus on that upper story housing. Here's some best practices. Here's some ideas of how you get there. But again, we offer that in many communities. We also offer a national conference. The end of March, we were in Boston. Next May, we will be in Birmingham, Alabama. This year was our biggest conference ever. We had just under 2,000 attendees. So it's a great opportunity. And again, you have everyone from literally a town of 1,000 people to Boston and everything in between for population size. So again, the folks you meet, the workshops, the other things are amazing. We also just some resources that are available. Any of you can go to our website, download them, read them, whatever you would like. We dig deep into what's happening with housing in our communities. We've seen a huge swing in upper story and downtown housing. I think the stereotype was that for years, nobody lived downtown or nobody wanted to live downtown. We've really seen a change in that. So again, for a lot of communities, housing is a key piece. So again, we have a deep dive into that, our housing things. Just a couple of other resources that we do offer, what we call market analysis. Again, that transformation strategy piece to really work with the community to say, what's happening here? What's the business climate? What's the retail climate? What are your gaps? What are things that are good here? We dig deep into entrepreneurial ecosystems, as we call it, or E3, to say, where are entrepreneurs coming from? Are we still trying to ship them in, or are they already here? Maybe everybody in your community on some level is an entrepreneur, and how do we work with them to do a little more? A couple of programs that I want to talk about. 2 different programs. Top right, the inclusive backing is through American Express. Actually, last week we announced 350 grants of $5,000 across the country. As it happens, 28 of those 350 were in Illinois, and almost top to bottom, from Chicago to Elgin to you name it, all over the state. We're really excited for that. And then some of those grant recipients will also have the opportunity to be awarded $25,000 more. One thing that I wanted to mention also, bottom right, is the T-Mobile Hometown Grant Program. We have a long relationship with T-Mobile, and we are exactly halfway through this program. 2.5 years ago, they released $5 million per year. They have committed to a $25 million funding level, and it's $5 million a year. Each quarter, grants of up to $50,000 are awarded to communities across the country. It's incredibly competitive. The first quarter of this year, we had almost 600 applications. So it's very competitive. And these are designated for communities of under 50,000 population. It also is designated for projects that are ready to go or need to complete some funding to be ready to go. We focus on bricks and mortar and physical things. I am going to ask Jenna from Sterling to talk for just a few minutes. We're really excited that in fourth quarter 2022, Sterling was awarded one of these grants. And I just want Jenna to talk a little bit about what they applied for and what they're doing with their program.
Thanks. So yeah, for the fourth quarter of 2022, we did receive one of the T-Mobile hometown grants. We received the full $50,000 that we asked for. It was kind of like a ridiculously easy form to complete as far as grants goes for that kind of money. We, for the last year and a half, had been planning a retail incubator project, basically building 6 small chalets. They're 12 by 16 each for retail startups in our downtown. We had a vacant lot and wanted to put it to use and needed a place to cultivate mom and pop shops in a brick and mortar fashion. So that project just opened in June of 3 weeks ago. They're in their third weekend right now. So I mean, it was a very beneficial funds to make this project happen. So. Anything else you want me to say, Jim?
Excellent. Thank you. If you have yes, we could talk an hour about what's happening with that project. If you have if folks have questions, if you put them in the chat, we'll try and get to them. But it's exciting. I know there were, I think, 10 or 11 Illinois applications in the first quarter of 2023. Those are being decided right now. But it's exciting. It's real money, as I say. $50,000 to me is a lot of real money. I encourage you truly. I know it seems like you may not have time. It is a rolling application. So again, second quarter will finish June 30th. I think there's a day or two in between, and third quarter for July, August, September will begin. So it is a rolling application. There are many communities that have applied once, not been awarded, keep applying. Every round is different, but those T-Mobile grants are ongoing. As I said, the focus is on physical improvements, whether it's, as Jenna described, whether it's Sterling building an outdoor incubator, building that, whether it's saving a historic library, whether it's a community park that is needed. Those type of things are the projects we look at. Again, if you go to our website and or the T-Mobile website, there are very, very great examples of what's been funded. It might inspire you. And again, Jana said, and I agree, I've applied for a lot harder grants and received a lot less than $50,000. So again, take a look at it and consider it. 2 other programs that I'll talk about. There's a small sliver of Illinois that will be eligible. The Simmons Foundation in the Path of Totality grant, we just released it today, actually. But we will be offering $10,000 grants. This is all tied to the eclipse, which is happening next year on April 8th. $10,000 grants for science-related community programming. The other thing I will mention separate from that is our Grow with Google program. We will be rolling this out nationwide, that we have partnered with Google for community coaches, working directly one-on-one with business owners for their trainings, how to use technology, how to use Google tools. It's both in-person and virtual training, but an exciting program. Some of the services that we provide, again, we do provide funding, but we are not primarily, we are not a funding mechanism. We partner with the T-Mobiles, the Googles, the others of the world of how can we be that conduit for 1,600 communities to say, here's some funding that you might apply for. Those American Express grants to directly help 350 businesses to say, here's a $5,000 grant to add technology, to add a point of sale, to add whatever you want to do to your business. But we work closely with communities on board and community and committee training. fundraising, development, how to grow your entrepreneurs, whatever it may be. And also that physical piece. Let's take a look at the physical infrastructure in your community, how we can help there. I'm going to skip through a few things. We do also offer what we call our GAMS Awards, Great American Main Street Awards. It's the highest honor we offer. And in Illinois, Libertyville and Jacksonville are both previous recipients. Over the years, there's been 100 communities nationwide. So it's pretty esteemed company to receive this. We're going to dig into some Illinois things here. The quick history, 30 years ago this fall, the Lieutenant Governor created Illinois Main Street, if you will. As he says, he had been looking at it, he and they had been looking at it for a year or two. And 30 years ago, unveiled this. There were 9 original communities in Illinois Main Street. For a number of reasons, all of those communities are not currently designated. There are a couple of them that are considering reapplying, which we're excited about. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the program had, full disclosure, the program was based in the Lieutenant Governor's office for years and had stops and starts. In 2016, the program closed. The budget was eliminated, staff disappeared or was reallocated, whatever. Through a couple of years, there were a handful of directors, Jana being one of them, that kept the program alive. In 2019, the Driehaus Foundation in Chicago agreed to provide 3 years of partial seed funding to the National Main Street Center to say, we want to see this program restart. Currently, we have 22 communities throughout the state. That is a current list of all of them. You will see the 4 that are in bold are our 4 veteran directors and veteran communities that, again, kept the program going, kept some communications going, kept some network going. But you can see we have communities that are very, population-wise, very small to very large and everything in between. In addition to this, we have 14 Chicago neighborhoods, primarily through the south and west side of Chicago. Frankie Payne is our Chicago director and works with all of those, but those are a separate program. They receive we're sister organizations, if you will. Resources we provide. I know Richard attended last year in Bloomington. Our state conference will be held this year in Pontiac, November 14th through 16th. We will be releasing details very soon, but we're excited about it. Pontiac actually hosted it 10 years ago, so it's nice to come back 10 years later and see what's happening with the community. Pontiac happens to be a city embedded program. So in their case, the Main Street director is a city employee and works for the city, but we're really excited to be there. We expect about 200 folks. So again, stay tuned and watch for details, but we'd love to see some of you attend there. Again, what we provide for it on an Illinois focus, what we provide for our communities is that training, leadership development, working in communities. We also do, in many cases, what we call a baseline assessment. That's us coming to a community and working with them to say, let's take the temperature and see what's happening here. Are things good? Are things bad? Are things a little of both? What can we help with? And again, I'll repeat, we don't do it for the community. We want to do it with the community. So business owners, property owners, residents. Residents are a key part of it that I think are often forgotten, but residents, business owners, property owners, city officials, county officials, schools, churches, social services. What do all of these things come together and what's the community feel like right now? Just a couple of things that we do offer. We are not part of officially the state of Illinois program, state of Illinois government program. We do receive funding, the budget that was just passed. We do receive a line item through the Lieutenant Governor's office, but we are not part of them. We have a agreement with them. The things that we do with that, we cover our costs for our Illinois communities to be active in the Main Street American Network. We offer scholarships and training for any of our directors that what we call our Main Street America Institute for training. We also are rolling out very soon, I hope next week or by the 1st of July, 2 different grant programs for our communities to say, how can we help you grow your farmers markets? So maybe you need tables and chairs and tents for your farmer's market. Maybe you need marketing for your farmer's market. Maybe you need vendor training for your markets to be able to offer funding for that. We also will be offering a marketing and communications grant program similar to that to say, perhaps your website is non-existent or needs overhaul, or maybe you need better online advertising. Maybe you need many things. Maybe you have no print materials, photography, video. So we'll be offering that to our communities, rolling that out very, very soon. Again, we offer every other week. Actually, one was supposed to be this morning. Every other week, we have a call with our directors. We also offer on-site training. Again, we will be having one of those tomorrow in Jacksonville. And again, we work as closely as we can with our communities. I'm going to go through a few things. I'm running a little long here, but again, we view very, very much that this is not a one and done. Not at all is it a one and done. That it's a comprehensive revitalization program. That again, we work with as many of the parts of that organization and that community as we can. Again, the 4 points: the economic vitality, the design, the organization, the promotion. That's Main Street speak. But to say, how can we put all of these pieces together to help make some things happen in this community? Again, there's those 4 points. But again, we start with, as we call it, the community vision for the downtown. And that's not something that we create. That's something we help to create, to say, what's the vision for this downtown, or what's the vision for this community? And again, you'll see the circle there. We believe in the circle, that it's not a destination, it's a journey. To say, perhaps you could say the work is never done, and maybe that's accurate, but to say, let's take a deep dive into what's happening in the community. Look at the market, look at how we can create some transformation, some economic development and community development here. We believe in work plans. Many people have different terms for them, but again, to say, what's the plan in this community? If you want to create a farmer's market, if you believe that's what your community needs and would benefit, how do you do that? What can we help put in place? If you believe you need a facade improvement grant program or a facade master plan, how can you do those things? We also feel really strongly that you have to be able to have some measurable outcomes. It's not just, we're going to make all these great plans, we're going to become an event organization, and then we don't know it, we don't follow up on any of it. To say, what feels right for this community? And again, it's not us dictating all of this. It's shared to say, we play our piece, but to say, what does the community feel? What does the community want? Again, our term for it is transformation strategies. It might be a little bit of a heady title. You can call it a community plan, a master plan, economic development, community development, whatever you would like. But again, those are some things that we work on there. And again, it's that comprehensive piece that we're about. What's the physical environment? What's the business environment? What's the social environment? How do we have people involved, whether those are the residents involved, whether that's business owners, whether that's property owners? How do we involve all of these people to make the community a little bit better? And I've said before, we feel so strongly that we work with them, and we try and work with everyone, or those that want to work with us, to say, let's take all these ideas, let's put them all in a bucket and see what we have when we're done. To say, or throw it on the wall and see what sticks. To say, here's the priorities for this community. And again, I feel so strongly, every community is different. Certainly there are best practices. And if you're a community of 10,000 people, we might say, here's what's happening in other communities that might be your size or a similar size. I would also say many times we say specifically, here are communities that are not like yours. You might be a community of 3,000 people. Here's a community of 20,000 people. You've got a huge population swing, but here's some ideas that you could learn, whether it's big to small, small to big, but to say, here are best practices. Here's things we've learned. Here are suggestions. We try hard also to connect directors with one another, to say, you know what, our communities with each other, we're really struggling with lack of retail in our district. That's probably just about every district in the country, but to say, we need some help. We need some new ideas. We need some fresh ideas. How can we beef up our retail? How can we beef up our restaurants? Whatever it may be, how can we deal with clean and safety issues? We have communities that have a serious public safety challenge or homelessness issues or social issues. That's not necessarily our role, but how can we play a role in that to say, we want to try and improve communities, however it is, through it's all of those things. But again, every community looks a little different. And we balance those four. It's not, we see communities sometimes become an event organization. The one that I worked for 14 years became really event heavy. We made a whole lot of money from events sometimes, but to say events are great and potentially they can bring thousands of people to the neighborhood and they spend money in restaurants and they spend money in stores, or it can be a huge drag. It can be a huge drag time-wise, but to say, absolutely, that promotion piece, that event piece is important, but how do you balance that? So it's not you're doing everything events, nothing else is happening. So I think those is a key. And again, it's not perfectly balanced, of course. Communities and organizations go through their ups and downs and can be heavy in one or not heavy in another. Board changes, staff changes, community changes. We're working with one community right now. They're a community of about 20,000 and they have an employer of over 10% of that is probably leaving the community to say, what's the community going to look like? What's the downtown going to look like? So we try and help where we can there. These are examples of some of the things that our 4 points might work on. Again, we try so hard to not be prescriptive. We certainly will suggest best practices, suggest ideas. Excuse me, but these are 4 very, very general buckets of what communities might work on. Again, in one community, even looking at the same list, what one community does for communications can be very, very different than another community. We have communities that continue to have a printed monthly newsletter. We have other communities that say, I haven't done a newsletter in 10 years. It's all online. It's all whatever it may be. For design, we have communities that are very strong in that with a strong historic preservation bent, that's a priority to that community. Other communities, they struggle with that. But to say, how do we preserve what's here? How do we provide funding for them, whether that's a facade master plan, whether that's facade grants period, whether that's trying to renovate a whole block of buildings to say, we need to bring more folks in. I think that physical piece, of course, ties into the economic vitality piece to say, what's happening with businesses here? Are things good? Are things not so good? How do we nurture those homegrown entrepreneurs? How do we encourage people to open or expand their businesses here? And certainly last but not least, that promotion piece. So that's the physical, that's the promotion, that's the social and part of it to say, what events make sense here? Some communities do a lot of events. Some do a farmer's market, some do a car show, some do a pub crawl, some do a historic walking tour. What of those things make sense? And that's kind of that mixed bag of what makes sense for a community. But again, we try really hard to just say, we'd like to see a comprehensive program. And again, programs, of course, go through their ups and downs, they go through their strengths, but to say, here's a very general idea. And we try hard to listen to communities to say, what's going on here? How can we help? Are there trainers we can bring in? Are there consultants bring in? Are there one-on-one conversations we can have? But again, we try and be that partner. Again, I said earlier, we don't necessarily write big checks, but we try and provide that as a resource. But I'm going to pause one more slide. Of course, we encourage you to follow us on all social media. We have a weekly e-blast that you might receive. Again, different subjects every week: housing, business growth, promotions, neighborhood safety, whatever it may be. Those are all of our social media channels. But again, mainstreet.org is our main website. You can find all of it there. But I'm going to thank you and pause right there. I'm going to stop sharing and take a drink of water and see where we're at.
Wow. You can't say today that you did not get a lot of information. Jim, thank you so much for sharing this information on Main Street's at the national and Illinois level for the history, the goals, the programming, a lot there. It clearly shows how flexible the Main Street program is and how it works to meet the community's goals and needs. I guess another way to say this, and if you could see me pointing a finger, there's 3 more back at me. You can clearly teach an old dog new tricks with this program, so good information there.
I'm gonna quickly interrupt. I'm gonna start with one thing I want to say, and Kirk, I had it on my list. Kirk asked it, and I thought someone would. What's next for communities? Quickly, we are intending to, as we are finalizing things right now. We will have an application round later this year. Very tentatively, it will be released around August 1st with a deadline of early to mid-September. And then we will be making some announcements at our state conference in November. As we have identified more funding, we want to grow communities. We want to grow the program. So again, whether we have communities that were involved in the past or brand new or a combination of them, it will be an application process. At this very moment, if you want to go to our to the mainstreet.org website and send a check, you are a community member. That is different than being a designated Illinois Main Street community. That is an application process to say we will select up to probably 5 communities later this year to say you are a designated community. And then we start providing services. Again, we have hundreds of other organizations that are community members, and literally that takes a payment and you get logged in and you're good to go. You have access to many resources, but again, that is different than being a designated member for this.
Okay. The time has come for questions. I've been fortunate. Some people have posted some for me that I've got asked here, but I'm going to remind you once again, if you could put your questions into the chat box, we will get to them and ask them as we go through this particular portion of the webinar. If you want to ask your question on your own, raise your hand and we'll get that done. Or if you don't want to ask your question and you want to be more private about it, feel free to send me your question and we'll get those done. Jim, here's the first one that I've got for us. In your mind, what makes a successful Main Street program?
I have 2 answers, and one, it's a little corny, but it's people who care. And I can bash a couple Iowa communities because I don't work there anymore. One of which had a director that was a great friend, and she still is a great friend, but truly that community had been in the program for, I would say, 10 years. And literally people stopped caring. People didn't want to be involved with the organization, couldn't get board members, cycled through some directors, but people just stopped caring. And again, whatever that feels like in a community might be different, but people that care about a community, and part 2 of that, and almost the same as people that are willing to work. It's a long haul. It is a long, long haul to do this. And perhaps you feel like we never are done. Maybe you are never done, but to say people that care and people that are willing to put in some work. In 95% of the cases, we strongly encourage Main Street organizations to have a working board, not an advisory board. People have to do the work. At the end of the day, most of our Main Street organizations are 1 or 2 person staff. There are exceptions, but most are a 1 or 2 person staff. So that 1 or 2 people can only do so much. So it depends on volunteers, heavily on volunteers, heavily on a real board that cares and is active.
So it's the community vibe that you feel when you go in, and then it's the willingness to stand up, be counted, and take part in the work that comes out of this.
Agreed.
Okay, I'm going to move to the next one that has been sent over to me. You mentioned this, and I want to ask you to elaborate a little bit further. And I'm going to phrase the question this way. I'm already one of your communities. And you're coming in and you're now doing that evaluation meeting. What are you looking for in that evaluation meeting that you're going to report back to us at the end of the day?
I think it's, we're taking the temperature of how things are there. Again, we don't necessarily come in and say, yes, we'll meet with all the folks we hope to meet with, community groups, focus groups, and to say, here's what we heard. We're not necessarily there to say, you must make these changes. We'll make recommendations, but to say, here's what we're hearing from your community. And I feel really strongly that communities and programs go through cycles. Maybe it's an ongoing cycle to say, things are good right now. Things are not so good right now. We're going through a massive community change. We're having a major employer leave, or we're having a major employer come to the community. I think I hope we provide that independent set of eyes to say, here's what we see. We're not here to criticize you or tear apart the community. We're going to say, here's what we see. We're going to make suggestions, and that's what they are. They aren't requirements, but here are suggestions. And again, here's what we're seeing in other places. And I think in just about every case, we can learn some things from other communities. It's not a cookie cutter approach, but to say, here are things we might be able to suggest from other communities.
Okay, because I knew back in Missouri when Missouri Main Street came in and did their evaluation of one of my communities. That was very true. They had 4 or 5 listening sessions where community members came into particular parts, either promotion, economic vitality, the different points of the program, and they listened to them and then reported back that evening to the group. Which is very important, very good. Now I'm going to ask another question that came up through the group here. And this is something that is very true in Illinois rural communities, as I work in rural communities and Mike does, and so many others of us here. Housing is a big concern. And you mentioned that, and you mentioned your guide. How do you approach that issue?
Housing, I agree, Richard. Housing is a huge issue. We have communities that don't have housing they need, don't have housing to have for employees, don't have housing, period. We look at the district more than the entire community. So we're looking at a downtown district or a business district to say, is there housing here? We're trying hard. Again, we really, the housing, I'm not trying to plug our report. That housing report, it's extensive and it's detailed to say, here are programs that maybe other communities are doing, whether that's to incentivize upper story housing, whether that's to incentivize housing in the community, period. One of our communities has a pretty strong downtown district, but they of course have lots of open fields that they'd like to build houses in. So is there a way we can incentivize new homes? Is there a way we can incentivize home improvements, period? But what's the role between the district, I'll say, and the community? We have great examples of, again, some funding programs. Every community is different. Every community has a different budget or a budget they'll support. But to say, how can we incentivize people? What are creative ways to doing it? With some mixed use development, with just building preservation and renovation, period. To say, do we have places that people would even consider living? Take that temperature and do it to say, what do we even have here? A community that is a designated member right now, they really have not done a survey in 12 or 15 years of what's housing like downtown. So do we even know if anyone lives upstairs? And what's the condition of those? How do we figure out what we can do? So again, it's really taking a hard look. That's a long process. I will say, when I was in West Des Moines, it took us years to really figure out what's happening. How can we put together some incentives? And it's just an ongoing challenge. I don't have I don't have a silver bullet answer at all. It's tough. I think that's one of the toughest things we're dealing with right now.
Only had silver bullet answers. Life
Yes.
would be so easy. Another question that came up is, can you explain the application process? And then what is the investment for
Absolutely.
applying?
Yes, yes, we will again, we're targeting the August, September application round with a decision happening after that, and then announcing at our state conference where we're at. But the process will be, yes, it will be an online application, and it is not, I will say this is not a 10-minute fill out a worksheet. But it's taking a look at the community to say, here's how we're structured. Maybe in your community, you have no organizations, or maybe in your community, you have a chamber of commerce and a tourism office and a city or county economic development, to say what makes sense in this community. And probably most importantly, why is there a need for Main Street? Why do people care? Who are the people that are involved? What do you see your community becoming, or what do you want to see your community becoming? So to dig into that, to provide demographics, to provide information on your community, to provide us a visual picture of what it is. Talk about who the organization, maybe you have an organization and it's time to look at Main Street, or maybe you don't have an organization. How is this going to happen? We do require a paid staff on some level. It's heavy on volunteers, but we do require a paid staff member. We will be having a webinars plural, to explain more as we roll around that application round. So there will be that. We will also ask some of our existing communities to participate, to say, here's how we became into Main Street. We do anticipate, full disclosure, having more communities apply than we are able to take due to funding and staffing cost. Currently, new communities that are designated, it is a $2,000 cost per year. That is for the first couple of years as we provide deeper services to them. All of our existing designated Main Street communities beyond that are currently, it is a $500 fee per year. The services we provide, we feel are of a much higher value than that, but we also want to keep this as affordable for communities as we roll them in.
Thank you for that clarification, Jim, because that was something that some of my communities have expressed in the past. Is that they just felt that they couldn't afford to do that, but explaining the cost factor and the value in that is a good thing.
And we try hard to keep, I mean, certainly we have a budget like everyone does. Some states, it is a $5,000 to $10,000 yearly fee. We aren't headed there. At least I don't think we're headed there at all. We want communities to be involved. Of course, we try and cover some of our costs, but again, we're trying to keep this as reasonable as we can for those that are designated.
While we have a few more questions, I will point your attention to the screen. There is a poll there that we are going to ask, that we are asking you to participate in, because it's important for Extension to know the value, or maybe not the value, but the impact that webinars like this has on those who attend, what you plan to do. Also, it helps show us that this is a worthwhile investment for us to make and to continue to provide. So please, if you haven't, take the survey. I'm going to come back to a few more questions we have here. We've posted the link in the chat for the Pontiac conference. So please, if you can review the chat and you want that link, please do that. Here's a question, Jim, that I'm interested in learning, because we in Extension are doing some succession stuff with small businesses, and they asked the question, does Main Street help small businesses transition to new owners when the original owner retires, leaves, things like that?
We have two different focus is there, if you will. Yes, our schedule allows, yes, we are happy to meet with a business owner to say, I'm ready to sell, I'm ready to retire. Whether they're saying, I need that next month, or I need that in a year or two. We are not attorneys, we are not accountants, but to say, what's your business look like? If you're looking at selling or transitioning, what's the timeline? What's your finances like? What's your growth like? Just take a look at that. And I think at the same time, our other focus is finding those, as I call them, homegrown entrepreneurs, to say they exist in your community, whether they're easily identified or not, but to say who in the community is interested in opening or buying or restarting a business, to say, how can we access them? How can we utilize our Main Street organization to be that resource for the community? To say, I want to sell, or I want to buy, or a little of, or both. How do we provide that connection there? But we're having more and more questions about that, to say, how do I sell my business? How do I retire? How do I whatever I do? So we're looking at that just as much as others are.
Okay. And Jim, another question that came up, and I think you've got it in the slides, which we will be sending out, but we also have posted, I think, in the chat. But in case I missed it, and God knows that's very possible, is there a link that they go to become a community member of Illinois Main Street? Or
you would go to, if you go to our national website, mainstreet.org. Our state website is ilmainstreet.org, as in ilmainstreet.org. But if you go to our national website, mainstreet.org, you are able to access that, and it gives you a list of what you receive. It's around $300 a year. So again, you can see what is there. There are many communities that use this as a kind of a test to say, okay, it's a reasonable investment, around $300, to say, let's test this out. Let's see how it feels. Again, it doesn't necessarily roll into being a designated community, but that's a good way to see what you like, what you don't like, and get a feel for it.
Okay. I'm going to ask you, if you want to post a few more questions, I am going to make a couple of closing announcements, but I will quickly hit the questions as they come up. Want to remind you that you will be receiving an email from us that gives you the details of either how to download a copy of today's presentation or to go view on our YouTube channel. We are so high tech here. Not me, but extension. I also want to take this opportunity to introduce a new series that we are kicking off next month, and it's called Small Business Finance, where we will be discussing small business owners' concerns regarding finance and other matters and that are relative to small business owners. Our first one is July 25th, and Mike Delaney and I are working with our Bradley University Small Business Development Center to bring this to us. If you're interested in attending and you're not already on this email list, please put your name and your name and email in the chat box, and we will send you an invitation to do that. We've posted the links there already, but you'll get that. Ann mentioned earlier on in the presentation today about extensions doing the strategic planning part for us. And I am posting in the chat right now just a reminder of that link. So if we encourage you to please take that, because it's going to help extension make sure that either we're doing the right stuff, or we need to change what we're doing, or we need to enhance what we're doing, because our mission as a land grant institution is to be very responsive to the people of Illinois. Much like what Jim said today, we are making a great partnership here because we have the same insight goals and are willing to move things forward. Okay. Laura has posted, and I'll bring that up here in just a minute. In closing, moderator today, I want to thank you for participating in this webinar on Illinois Main Street. My good friend Jim, to thank him for taking the time to share. I think, like I said, a lot of stuff, almost a fire hose, you know, but a lot of good stuff. I want to thank our sponsors, University of Illinois Community and Economic Development Program and Illinois Rural Development Council. And Laura has posted a link there for you. So folks, I'm going to say take care, be safe out there, and for now, goodbye.